Aristotle, an ancient Greek philosopher and polymath, was born around 384 to 322 BC. His Greek name is Roiodesigmet out Alamdata Aristoteles. The scientific sciences, philosophy, linguistics, economics, politics, psychology, and the arts are just a few of the many topics he writes about. The broader Aristotelian tradition that followed, which laid the foundation for the advancement of modern science, was started by him as the founder of the peripatetic school of philosophy in the Athens Lyceum. The biography of Aristotle is less known. He was born in the classical era in the northern Greek city of Stagira. Aristotle was raised by a guardian when his father, Nicomachus, passed away while he was a young boy. He enrolled in Plato's academy in Athens when he was 17 or 18 years old, and he stayed there until he was 37, around 347 BC. Aristotle left Athens shortly after Plato's demise and began tutoring Alexander the Great in 343 BC at Philip II of Macedon's request. In order to facilitate the writing of many of his hundreds of writings on papyrus scrolls, he created a library in the Lyceum. Despite writing numerous dialogues and treatises for publication, only around one-third of Aristotle's original work has survived. None of it was meant for publishing. Aristotle offered a sophisticated synthesis of the different schools of thought that had been practiced before. His ideas and research techniques have had a profound influence on people all over the world and are still discussed in modern philosophy circles. Only about one-third of Aristotle's original work has survived, despite the fact that he wrote several conversations and treatises for publication. None of it was intended for publication. Aristotle provided a highly developed synthesis of the several schools of thinking that had previously been in use. His theories and methods of investigation have impacted people globally and are being debated in contemporary philosophical circles. Medieval scholarship was significantly influenced by Aristotle's ideas. His physical science was influential from late antiquity and the early Middle Ages until the Renaissance. It was not systematically superseded until the Enlightenment and the development of theories like classical mechanics. Throughout the Middle Ages, he had an impact on Christian theology, particularly the Neoplatonism of the early Church and Judeo-Islamic philosophy. Aristotle was referred to as the master of those who know by the poet Dante, but he was also hailed as the first teacher by Muslim scholars and as the philosopher by Christian scholars such as Thomas Aquinas. The earliest formal study of logic is found in his works, which were examined by medieval intellectuals like Jean Buridan and Peter Abelard. Logic was influenced by Aristotle even after the 19th century. Furthermore, the contemporary emergence of virtue ethics has reignited interest in his ethics, despite its constant influence. The specifics of Aristotle's life are generally unclear. Historians only agree on a small number of important aspects, and the biographies recorded in antiquity are frequently speculative. In Stagira, Chalcidice, approximately 55 kilometers, 34 miles, east of present-day Thessaloniki, Aristotle was born in 384 BC d. King Amyntas of Macedon had his father, Nicomachus, as his personal physician. Aristotle was taught biology and medical knowledge by his father when he was a young boy. When Aristotle was around 13 years old, both of his parents passed away, and Proxenus of Atarneus took on the role of guardian. 6. Aristotle most likely spent some time at the Macedonian palace, establishing his initial contacts with the Macedonian royalty, even if not much of his early life has remained. Aristotle relocated to Athens at the age of 17 or 18 in order to attend Plato's academy. The statement, "to experience is to learn," pi alpha theta epsilon v mu alpha theta epsilon nu, that he wrote on the sights seen at the Eleusinian Mysteries is likely a result of his own experiences there. 9. Before departing in 348 to 347 BC, Aristotle lived in Athens for over 20 years. Though it's possible that he fled before Plato passed away out of fear of the anti-Macedonian sentiments that prevailed in Athens at the time, the conventional account of his departure claims that he was unhappy with the Academy's direction when power fell to Plato's nephew Speusippus. 10. After that, Aristotle went to Asia Minor to see his friend Hermias of Atarneus' court alongside Xenocrates. Following Hermias' passing, Aristotle traveled to the island of Lesbos with his student Theophrastus, and the two of them studied the island's flora and fauna as well as its protected lagoon. Aristotle wed Pythias, who was possibly Hermias's adopted daughter or niece, while he was in Lesbos. Pythias was the name they gave to their daughter. Philip II of Macedon recruited Aristotle to be his son Alexander's tutor in 343 BC. Aristotle was appointed as the head of the Royal Academy of Macedon. During Aristotle's time in the Macedonian court, he gave lessons not only to Alexander but also to two other future kings, Ptolemy and Cassander. 13. Aristotle encouraged Alexander toward Eastern conquest, and Aristotle's own attitude towards Persia was unabashedly ethnocentric. In one famous example, he counsels Alexander to be a leader to the Greeks and a despot to the barbarians, to look after the former as after friends and relatives, and to deal with the latter as with beasts or plants. 13. By 335 BC, Aristotle had returned to Athens, establishing his own school there known as the Lyceum. Aristotle conducted courses at the school for the next 12 years. While in Athens, his wife Pythias died, and Aristotle became involved with her Hyppilis of Stagira. They had a son whom Aristotle named after his father, Nicomachus. If the Suda, an uncritical compilation from the Middle Ages, is accurate, he may also have had an Arimenos Palaephatus of Abydos. 14. Portrait bust of Aristotle, an Imperial Roman, 1st or 2nd century AD, copy of a lost bronze sculpture made by Lysippos. This period in Athens, between 335 and 323 BC, is when Aristotle is believed to have composed many of his works. 12. He wrote many dialogues, of which only fragments have survived. Those works that have survived are in treatise form and were not, for the most part, intended for widespread publication. They are generally thought to be lecture aids for his students. His most important treatises include Physics, Metaphysics, Nicomachean Ethics, Politics, On the Soul, and Poetics. Aristotle studied and made significant contributions to logic, metaphysics, mathematics, physics, biology, botany, ethics, politics, agriculture, medicine, dance, and theater. 15. Near the end of his life, Alexander and Aristotle became estranged over Alexander's relationship with Persia and Persians. A widespread tradition in antiquity suspected Aristotle of playing a role in Alexander's death, but the only evidence of this is an unlikely claim made some 6 years after the death. 16. Following Alexander's death, anti-Macedonian sentiment in Athens was rekindled. In 322 BC, Demophilus and Eurymedon the Hierophant reportedly denounced Aristotle for impiety, 17. Prompting him to flee to his mother's family estate in Chalcis, on Euboea, at which occasion he was said to have stated, "I will not allow the Athenians to sin twice against philosophy." 8-19, 20. A reference to Athens's trial and execution of Socrates. He died in Chalcis, Euboea, 2-21, 15 of natural causes later that same year, having named his student Antipater as his chief executor and leaving a will in which he asked to be buried next to his wife. 22. Like his teacher Plato, Aristotle's philosophy aims at the universal. Aristotle's ontology places the universal, kathalo in particulars, kath, hekaston, things in the world, whereas for Plato the universal is a separately existing form which actual things imitate. For Aristotle, form is still what phenomena are based on, but is instantiated in a particular substance. 34. Plato argued that all things have a universal form, which could be either a property or a relation to other things. When one looks at an apple, for example, one sees an apple, and one can also analyze a form of an apple. In this distinction, there is a particular apple and a universal form of an apple. Moreover, one can place an apple next to a book so that one can speak of both the book and apple as being next to each other. Plato argued that there are some universal forms that are not a part of particular things. For example, it is possible that there is no particular good in existence, but good is still a proper universal form. Aristotle disagreed with Plato on this point, arguing that all universals are instantiated at some period of time, and that there are no universals that are unattached to existing things. In addition, Aristotle disagreed with Plato about the location of universals. Where Plato spoke of the forms as existing separately from the things that participate in them, Aristotle maintained that universals exist within each thing on which each universal is predicated. So, according to Aristotle, the form of apple exists within each apple, rather than in the world of the forms. Aristotle wrote a series of works in dialogue form. The fragments that remain of them are not studied as much as they should be, partly because it is pleasanter to leave such a troublesome work to philologists, but also because of the conviction which has always obtained in the peripatetic school that the true Aristotle is to be found in the treatises. Even if we only wish to understand the treatises, however, the fragments of the lost dialogues can teach us a great deal. If we knew nothing else about the relation between the two kinds of writing, it would be highly significant to be able to determine that the dialogues, modeled on those of Plato, belong almost entirely to Aristotle's early years, and that in his later period he practically abandoned literary activity, since the treatises are merely the written basis of his very extensive activity as teacher and lecturer. There are indeed exceptions to this statement. Alexander or Colonization must, to judge from its title, have been a dialogue belonging to the time when Alexander's racial policy in Asia obliged Aristotle to make public announcement of his disapproval to the Greek reading world. This straggler therefore had a special reason in Aristotle's political position. Mutatis mutandis, the same is true of the collection of Rs 8 constitutions, which was intended for publication and was written in a clear and lively style, as we can tell from that of the Constitution of Athens. In spite of these exceptions, however, it remains true to say that in the course of his development Aristotle radically altered his views about the necessity of presenting science in literary form and about the relation between literary and truly productive work. With Plato, the primary impulse was originally the formative one. He did not write in order to set out the contents of his doctrine. His desire was to show the philosopher in the dramatic instant of seeking and finding, and to make the doubt and conflict visible, and that not in a mere intellectual operation, but in the fight against pseudoscience, political power, society, and his own heart, for the spirit of Plato's philosophy necessarily collided with all these forces. According to his original view of it, philosophy is not a sphere of theoretical discoveries but a reorganization of all the fundamental elements of life.